What a beautiful example of just how much things can change in football after a single week. Last Sunday, we might have hit our season's low point with the loss at Chelsea after nearly winning against Juventus at home on the last kick of the game. And now, 6 days later and 6 points more, if you look at the table and just add the points dropped at home to Crystal Palace and Bournemouth, 4, look at the position we'd be in. Those are the fine margins of a ruthless Premier League. Presented by 24/7 Services, let's review Villa 1, Southampton 0. Welcome to the parlor where the mood has changed substantially over the last 6 days. And us supporters, we're wired to think that based on your table positions and the value of your squad, games should be easy and points automatic. If you're a younger fan, you play a lot of FIFA or fantasy football, you honestly do think that if your table position is this and your squad value is that and your opponent is down here and over here, that games are guaranteed to be won. And Saturday showed us that there is no such thing as guarantees. The games are played on grass, not on paper or by a computer algorithm. Chuck in one of the worst weather days in recent history, along with a slightly rotated lineup, but still with several pairs of tired legs, and you have a recipe for disaster. So in many ways, Saturday is almost as satisfying and certainly as crucial points-wise as the win on Wednesday, even though we were playing the league's two worst road teams. But there's a huge difference between winning a game that you should comfortably win versus actually going out and winning that game, because there is no such thing as comfortable in the Premier League. Welcome officially to the Holy Trinity show, which attempts to explore the three key issues or moments that defined, in this case, Villa 1, Southampton 0. And our two senior correspondents, Samir Gaby, still slightly jet-lagged, and Alex Dutton were both struggling to keep their hands warm, even with gloves on. The key numbers for me re-emphasized a frustrating theme with this year's version of Aston Villa. The word I'm looking for is wasteful. When you look at the XG and the amount of shots and big chances created, this probably should have been a lot easier. I'm going to show you an incredible stat later on, and that is the big chances created table. Ollie Watkins on his own is now up to 15 big chances missed on the season. Shot attempts versus on-target shots, too wide a margin for me, even in those conditions. And this was a day when we really could have used some success from set pieces to see the game out. Corners 14-1 in favor of Villa, and I don't remember a single one that really caused significant panic. The first big issue from any game is squad selection, and given our pre-festive period fixture congestion, it should come as no surprise that there were 4 changes in this game, including a complete rearrangement of the back line and John Duran coming in for Ollie Watkins. What I did find surprising, however, was that John McGinn and Morgan Rogers went the distance again, considering how many minutes they've put in over the last several weeks. Why is that? Is that because Unai Emery feels he has no other options, or are those two players somehow built differently stamina-wise? Because those two positions that McGinn and Rogers play are far more physically demanding with more running required than, say, defenders. Tielemans finally got a rest after an hour, the same time that Leon Bailey was forced off, carrying on this theme that just when a Villa player comes back to full fitness, Amadou Onana, another one is suddenly sidelined, and I'm now convinced that the number one recruitment need for this club, whether this is in January or later, is another right-sided attacking player, because the drop-off from Leon Bailey, who hasn't set the house on fire this season himself, not even scored yet in the Premier League, to then Jadon Philogene is just too wide. And I believe this club is thinking, well, we need to significantly upgrade on Leon Bailey if we want to improve the squad. This is another issue that keeps rearing its head, and that's jittery Jadon. Not that he's ropey, but he makes us jittery when he comes on. I mean, coming on with a 2-0 lead against Brentford midweek, totally different proposition than when you're coming into a game where you're trying to see out, ideally, a 1-0 lead against Southampton. And you look at his statistics, well, he was 14 of 19 on accurate passing, 2 for 6 on ground duels, and only 1 of 3 on successful dribbles. That all speaks to his inability to keep us in possession. But then he also goes flying into challenges and gives away unnecessary fouls, which speaks to a lack of discipline on his part. Now, I ask again, if Emi Buendia can't step into that role, which is similar to the one at Norwich where he won the Championship Player of the Year just 4 years ago, then will he ever get a chance to play? But doubt Unai Emery's ability to get the very most out of anybody in his squad at your own peril. One person who doesn't necessarily hate these Storm events like Darragh is Paul Handsaker from 24/7 Services, who knows to keep the ringer on before he goes to bed because it's inevitable he's going to get phone calls, including to the company's Liverpool office, where the derby was cancelled on Saturday morning. That's how bad the weather was. And have you seen what's happening at Everton's new ground? Look at the water down from the roof. And by the way, this is a $1 billion new barn. Paging Paul and his crew. And just because you have a leak doesn't mean you have to rip off the whole roof and replace it, even though 24/7 Services can do that. But they also know how to patch and repair leaks using all sorts of new products on the market, like the Sika roll-on product, which we could see here at the Co-op Funeral Care in Shipley. And like with any new product or material on the market, the crew has to learn the correct techniques and applications. 24/7 Services was founded on a roof. I sincerely hope you never have to call them for an emergency, but if you have one, don't muck about. Get a fair quote and have it done right the first time. And of course, feel free to talk the mighty Villa with the team in green. Frustrating and recurring issue, our inability to kill off games, especially at home, after creating a landslide of wonderful situations. And I know there is a segment of the fan base that wants to pin all of that on Ollie Watkins, and I'll get to that later. Right now, I want you to look at this table. This is the Premier League's big chances created table, and look who's at the very top. Aston Villa has created more big chances than the runaway leaders, Liverpool. What a revealing table this is. Many times after games, Unai Emery has said, I'd be worried if we weren't getting the chances, but we are. Well, that table tells us that we are more than capable of getting forward and creating great situations, but it also tells us we have a conversion problem. And Ollie Watkins has had 15 of those 42 big chances. I mean, that's almost exactly a third, and nobody will be more gutted about missing any of them than Ollie himself. If he can just pick up the ruthlessness a little bit, what a difference that could make. But also, what a difference if we could be a little bit more conscious about shutting the door at the other end. And I'll talk about that imminently. Be honest now, as these final seconds were playing out, you were having deep, dark, Bournemouth-like thoughts, because I know I was. I could see it all unfolding in front of my eyes, a gust of wind, a stranded Emi Martinez, their goalkeeper somehow winning an aerial duel, and Saints folklore occurring right before our eyes at the very death. Oh, I was experiencing it through the fibers of my couch blanket, but instead, more relief. Big issue number 3, the conditions. As supporters were bundled up on the terraces, sometimes wearing multiple layers. In fact, some supporters couldn't even sit down. They had that many layers on. The players were expected to just go out in their usual gear and win a game of football against the bottom team in the league. How Emi Martinez goes short-sleeved in a game like that is absolutely beyond me. And if you've played in multiple conditions like I have over my life in Canada, then you will probably agree with me when I say that wind and rain are the absolute worst. I'd rather play in snow because the snow doesn't stick to you and then get blown by cold wind. It's warmer playing in the snow. There isn't a single element that can impact a match more than the wind. And it was so strong in this game, it was actually pushing dead balls away. And I couldn't even tell which direction it was going. At first, based on the corner flags, I thought it was going in the direction of the north stand, but then later it seemed to swirl around the ground. So every single pass, every throw-in, every long ball is a potential disaster. And us stiffs, the paying public, think, well, you're professionals, you need to behave. This looks like fun playing in games like this. It is not fun. It is awful. And players have to remain completely disciplined and focused because one stray ball, as we saw several times, and the game completely changes. And easily the worst position to play in those conditions is goalkeeper, which I can attest to, because you don't know what the wind's going to do with the ball. Sometimes it hangs it up. Other times it accelerates it at you. And then the surface is slippery, and so the ball skids along the ground. It's awful. Emi Martinez, nursing a fissure on one of his fingers, had a lot of standing around to do, so he's getting pelted by the wind and the rain, and then he's being called into action suddenly. Now, we did help him out quite a bit because for the second consecutive game, we did not allow a shot on target in that first half. I was shivering and cold watching that game from my couch under a blanket. Big issue number 2, the clean sheet. Oh, the clean sheet. Given everything I just said about the conditions, it is remarkable that we did manage to finally get our second shutout of the season, the other coming at home to Manchester United. After the game, Unai Emery even said, our number one priority for this game was to not concede. And if this is the way Aston Villa is going to be going forward from now until the end of the season, where they shut the back door, I'm okay with that because, as I said earlier, we've done more than enough going forward to then go on and get goals. But as I mentioned earlier, our inability to kill off games by being more ruthless in front of goal, maybe earlier in games, has been a problem for this year's group. And you know, that may change. We may start clicking and all of a sudden the goals are flying in again at one end. But until that time, I'd be more than happy if at the other end, our Champions League sensibilities and defensive pragmatism would seep into our Premier League form. Because as the old footballing cliche goes, goals may win you games, clean sheets will win you trophies. And the number one big moment that defined Villa 1, Southampton 0, of course, Duran's dagger. The Colombian's first Premier League start of the season was, performance-wise, a follow-up to his impressive substitute appearance on Wednesday against Brentford, where I felt he should have scored at least one goal. And I'm thinking back to the big chance later in that game. And this is where I think John Duran still has lots of room for growth. We all know he can throttle the ball full power past a goalkeeper. But can he place the ball into a corner at times, which is what he didn't do against Brentford? And this was also the case, remember, against Bournemouth, where we eschewed a lot of really good chances. Can he become a Colombian cold, hard assassin, where he locates the goalkeeper, takes that breath, and squeezes the trigger? In minute 24, our chaotic Colombian showed a wide array of his best characteristics all at once. And Diego Carlos also showed us probably his biggest gift, at least in an attacking sense, and that's his ability to spin in a long ball. He was actually 5 for 9 on accurate passes over 20 yards. But in this particular instance, that ball wasn't completed because a defender got there first. So he doesn't even get credited for an assist on the goal. But in hindsight, nobody will care about such inconsequential details. How Duran was able to first harass and then basically outmuscle two Southampton defenders before stripping and dispossessing Harwood Bellis and then breaking in on goal was only the beginning of him showing off the very wide array of tools he has available in his toolkit. He is all arms and legs. It must be a nightmare to defend him. In fact, I was worried he was going to get called for a foul because it looked like he had his arm extended in trying to win those duels. After bamboozling both Harwood Bellis and Wood, John Duran crucially does something that he tends to do often in these kinds of circumstances, and I debate with myself often whether or not it is on purpose or whether it's just a heavy touch. But he knocks the ball ahead of himself into space, and this does a couple of things. One, it gives him room to sprint onto it, but also it teases the goalkeeper off his line. And look at the starting position of the goalkeeper. And then when it's knocked ahead, he comes roaring out. And at that point, the goalkeeper's cooked. And it kind of makes John Duran's mind up for him in a way. Now, you still have to finish it, and it's not easy. John Duran makes it look easy. The strike obviously needs elevation, but from there, it's easy to go a little too high and knock it over, especially with the wind. You have a goalkeeper charging out who's a visual distraction that Duran has to evade. And what does Big John do? Well, he does what he's done his entire career, ripple the netting. And that, of course, and unsurprisingly, elicits the Duran has to start now and Ollie Watkins needs to take a back seat, which is only amplified further when Ollie Watkins misses a number of opportunities to either score or set up a goal that would ice the game. Obviously, Southampton chasing that game did lend itself to us going on the break, and many times Morgan Rogers was available for that midfield penetrating ball, which oftentimes came from Boubacar Kamara, who had another very good game. And so many times in the second half, we were outnumbering our opponent as we were breaking forward, and Ollie Watkins was central to it. The one he may regret is where he tried to shoot it rather than maybe playing it across to his teammate on the right-hand side. But what so many people fail to recognize is that Watkins manipulates defenders and drags them around all over the place, which is what creates the space in the first place. I do wish that that faction of our fan base would see the number 9 situation a little bit differently, and that doesn't have to be one over the other. We should be happy and grateful that we have two totally unique, talented number 9s that are contributing to this team in a meaningful way, and both could still become more predatory and ruthless as the season goes on. John Duran has benefited by being a substitute and running against tired legs. And who's made those legs tired? Why, Ollie Watkins, who's a worker. And I've said it a million times on this show, but we are a completely different team depending on who leads the line. And that doesn't necessarily mean better or worse. We need both of them. They complement each other. I think it's a good thing. The Sill Hill Brewery star performer was Super John McGinn. I can't believe he went 90 minutes. The guy's 31 years of age. He is just going and going week in and week out, this time playing in behind the striker again as a number 10 with Morgan Rogers pushed wide left. Unai Emery talked about the importance of his captain in the lead up here, and whether it was a tackle, a drive, or just maintaining possession by using that pronounced posterior of his, McGinn earned himself a hellish lager. Matured to perfection, spicy and feisty, just like McGinn, crisp, refreshing, and I'll add another one, long-lasting, even on a hellish day. You know, you're going to have to experience Hellas Lager at the tap room in Aston because it's sold out online. Did you know that you can order Sill Hill Brewery beers right from the comfort of your couch? In fact, I put a link to the variety pack in the description of this video. Give it a try. Let me know in the comments how you like it. Let's update the categories I like to follow throughout the season as our record at Villa Park improves again, and it needs to keep doing so for us to remain in the neighborhood we're currently in. 12 goals combined from 15 Premier League games between our strikers is a good return that could still improve. We scored first again and again in that second 15-minute phase of the first half. But of all the stats that will stand out to me after Saturday is the clean sheet. We need to keep collecting those and prioritizing those for us to get back to the Champions League again next season. Now, a very big Champions League match day 6 encounter on Tuesday in Leipzig. And you'll recall these two teams met in New Jersey for preseason in what turned out to be a very testy affair. Will that somehow spill over, or was that just too long ago and meaningless? Because Diego Carlos was sent off in that game for getting involved with Openda, and that didn't just ruin the game from a preseason preparation standpoint, it nearly ruined Diego Carlos, who was frozen out after that game. Now, RB Leipzig has had a rather underwhelming season, even though they've won their last two league games, the latest this Saturday, 2-0 at Holstein Kiel, but they have had an injury-impacted season so far. I would imagine that the biggest injury absentee for them is 21-year-old Dutchman Xavi Simons, because he was a key cog up until he did his ankle, and since then, Leipzig have played 11 games. They've won only 4 of them. Another interesting connection between the two teams is that we were allegedly chasing the right-back Herr Trauter all summer, but it was Leipzig who swooped in and eventually signed him. Now, when the draw was announced and the league phase unveiled, obviously, Bayern Munich and Juventus are tough tests, but we did have those at home. So I thought that Leipzig, on paper anyway, would have been the most difficult fixture in our entire 8 Champions League games. But Leipzig have yet to earn a single point from any of their 5 games. There's only 2 teams below them in the entire table. So is it a must-win for them? Because they're 6 points away from the knockout phases. Even a win might not be enough for them. So I'll be very curious to see how they approach this, given that Frankfurt is coming to their ground the following Sunday in a big league game. I'm quite hopeful about Tuesday, actually, and if it goes very well for Aston Villa with 2 games left, including a home date against Celtic, would it be too early to think that our spot in the top 8 is secured? I'd have to think so, and we really would benefit from missing out on that playoff round at the end of January. Now, after that, we have 2 really big games on the horizon against teams right in our immediate Premier League neighborhood at the City Ground for Nottingham Forest this coming weekend, and then a week later against Manchester City. It was actually a year ago on Friday where Leon Bailey scored the lone goal in that memorable and wonderful night at Villa Park. And Man City's problems are not seemingly going away right now, so you have to look at it as opportunity again. Until midweek, thank you so much for watching, and as always, up the mighty Villa.